Bravo bosses. This is the Bravo Investigator podcast. I'm your host, Dana, and today we are talking about Reality Check Inside America's Next Top Model documentary. Let's get into it. Happy Tuesday, everyone. I hope everyone's had a great start to the week. And today is my first day of work. So I'm excited. I'm nervous. I'm excited because I'm excited to become like a regular member of society again. But I'm also nervous because I'm not sure I remember how to be a regular member of society again. But hopefully it all works out for me. Put me in your thoughts and prayers today. I'm actually recording this Monday evening. I spent my last day off watching America's Next Top Model documentary on Netflix twice because you guys know I have to watch everything twice. I wanted to make sure I had enough time to absorb it and really get all my thoughts and feels together, which is why I always call these types of episodes my thoughts and feels. Because I wanted to make sure I just had like all of those thoughts and feels ready for you guys for your Tuesday while I'm at work, so that you're not missing me too badly. And that's also because I just don't know what the show is going to look like for the rest of the week, so I will keep you informed. Now, Patreon babies, nothing changes for you guys. You always get your extra episode a week for only $5 a month, and those episodes are ad-free and they're also early for all the regular episodes. And the only thing that's going to be changing for you guys is that your Patreon episode will come out on Saturdays now instead of Wednesdays. But as always, you guys can join the Patreon at patreon.com/the Bravo Investigator podcast. And I will also say that for sure, Monday episodes, your Monday reality roundups, I will still be doing those every Monday. I'm still just trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing in terms of other Bravo recaps during the week, as well as Love is Blind and other things that are going on. So there's so much TV. I just sort of want to lean into the first couple of weeks of work and just sort of see how things go and make sure that I'm just not feeling too overwhelmed. But that being said, I knew I wanted to watch this documentary today, and I figured I might as well give you guys something while I am at my first day. So, yeah, let's talk about this documentary. I had lots of thoughts and feels. I will say a few things about it off the top. So this was on Netflix. It was a three-part documentary. Each episode was about an hour. They were like 50 to like 58 minutes, something like that. Not a difficult watch. I will say that it probably could have been longer. I could have seen many more episodes of it. I feel like there were many aspects that were just lightly touched on, but weren't dealt with in depth. Like some of the medical things that happened to the models, like hypothermia. That's one of the episodes that really sticks in my mind and always has for many, many years. We'll touch on that later. But yeah, they really sort of just touched on a lot. Um, Tyra was in the documentary, which, was a choice. You could look at it two ways, and that's why I'm kind of not sure how I feel about it. I would say on one end, that was smart of her because otherwise everybody else is telling your narrative and you're not telling your narrative. And that way you're not getting your story out there and everybody's going to blame everything on you probably, right? So it gives you the chance to tell your side and take back the narrative. However, I don't feel like she did such a great job at that because she didn't take a lot of accountability, which we will talk about as we go through it. I would also say that I would have loved to have seen more of the models and just more of their stories. It's hard to know how many people they reached out to and how many people wanted to be a part of it. Like, who knows, really? And I just think it would have been cool to see like Molly O'Connell from Southern Charm or like other Bravo people like Eva Marcille, who was mentioned in the documentary, but it just would have been cool to see people who are like kind of big Bravo lebs today and do that kind of crossover. Sorry, not Nigel, Jay Manuel, who was in the documentary, he was wearing a black hoodie with a white t-shirt underneath and jeans for the documentary, which I thought was a choice. And I thought he looked great. Don't get me wrong. I was just sort of like, oh, you sort of dressed down for this documentary. I could be wrong. I just felt like it said something about him wanting to be there and maybe his lack thereof wanting to be there. Did I have any other thoughts off the top? I guess that was sort of it. I will also issue a trigger warning for this episode because there will be discussions of SA as well as just general horrible things that have happened to some of these people before we get into it. But yeah, those were sort of some of my main thoughts going into it. Oh, and sorry, I'll have one other major thought going into the entire documentary. I will also say that it seems like Tyra's goal in being in this documentary was not just to take back the narrative, but was to create a narrative that, yes, if you look at all of the things that happened on this show from a 2020 lens, yes, you can see how these things are now inappropriate now that we have this information. But in my opinion, there are things that are inappropriate now because now we have more information, but there's also things that have always been inappropriate since the beginning of time, and there's a difference there. And I feel like there was definitely things that happened on this show that were screwed up from the beginning of time. So in that regard, I feel like she's really trying to push that narrative throughout this entire documentary. Like, yes, with that 2020 lens, yes, with that 2020 lens, but not really taking accountability for the fact that she did some pretty fucked up things on this show that anyone at any period of time since the beginning of time would think was fucked up. So, with all that being said, we can sort of get into it. So, we know that Tyra was the executive producer of the show. And I'll also say, just for the record, like I was so into this show when I was younger. I watched two different iterations of it. I watched America's Next Top Model and I watched Canada's Next Top Model, which was hosted by Jay Manuel. And when I worked at the passport office when I was like in my early 20s, one of the judges came to the office because you see like everybody, right? It's the passport office. And she was waiting in like the long line. I was like, hey, I know you. You're one of the judges. She was like a judge and a model. I forget her name. And she was like, oh, can I bud the line? You know me. And I was like, no, because how could I let her? There is a whole line of people. But yeah, I mean, I was really into that show. And not because it was relatable in any way. I'll definitely say that. Like, I don't know why I liked it, to be honest with you. I never really thought about the fighting or anything, but there was definitely things that I noticed way back when, sort of as I said before, that were always inappropriate. So I will say that. But Tyra is saying in the documentary that a lot of people started binging the documentary during COVID, and that's when people started to realize how inappropriate it was. And that definitely has happened with many shows where with more time, with more information, we're like, oh, that's super cringe. And she said that it went from something that everybody loved to something that everybody hated. Now, I don't quite remember that happening, but she could be right. I wasn't super chronically online at the time that COVID was happening, to be honest. I should have been. I really wasn't doing anything. Um, but she sort of explains that at that time when this show was on, which was a long time ago at this point, we're talking 25 years when it started, she said that models still looked a certain way. They still had to be white, blonde, and skinny. And Tyra was already different, right? She felt defeated in the industry because she was a Black woman in the 90s. And she wanted to make Black women realize that maybe they could do it too. So she wanted to do a show that would sort of showcase what it takes to become a model, but not just with one type of model. So she thought that she was going to be changing the beauty standard. And in theory, that sounds amazing, right? I mean, as a Black woman in the industry, she obviously really struggled, but she also made it as a supermodel. And then to have her take on one of these shows, which we've seen be successful, sort of in the zeitgeist of like American Idol and shows like that, and America's something that involves a competition show involving models, right? It's kind of brilliant. So she starts speaking to Ken Mock to be the executive producer. This guy did Making the Band. And basically what she pitched him was a cross between American Idol and the real world, which, yeah, that makes sense. It's like a show about people with a talent, which is modeling, and the real world because they're all going to live together in a model house. Then she went with Jay Manuel because he was her makeup artist, which I actually didn't know. And they wanted to hire him to be the photo shoot director. So that was a really cool gig. Now, UPN was the only network that was apparently interested in them at the time. So they went to every network, but UPN was the only one that picked it up. And the way that the show was going to work was that there was going to be a prize. I remember there being like several different like smaller prizes, but the main prize was a modeling contract so that whoever wins can go out and become a supermodel. So Tyra and Jay were like best friends at the time. He felt like she knew that he would do anything for her, and they definitely had that kind of vibe about them. They did bring on Janice Dickinson at one point, who was a very famous supermodel. I don't remember when that happened, and I don't think it was from the beginning, and they don't really explain when, unless I missed it. My apologies if I did. But she was sort of like the Simon Cowell of the panel in a way, where she's just like yelling and screaming obscenities at everyone. She's so mean. She's saying things like, "It looks like you have a penis. Watch out for your legs." But the way the relationship Tyra and Jay had, it was just sort of like, well, I don't really feel like I can say anything. She sort of felt, or he felt like he still had that boundary with her. So then we also bring on a Nigel Barker. The network said that they needed a photographer who was good looking, straight, and white. And I don't believe that they actually said that. That's actually completely insane. I can't believe that that's something that was like said at the time. Now, this did bother Jay because he and Jay Alexander, who was also brought on, weren't straight or white. And it's basically like being told like they weren't even enough. But, Nigel is actually half Sri Lankan and half English. He was a photographer and model, and he definitely brought that sort of like wow factor of like, ooh, like women are very like interested in looking at him. He's a really good looking guy. Now, Miss J was somebody who obviously was the top of the game in terms of someone to bring on for runway coach and judge. Now, I remember even Jay Alexander from The Hills. Like, he was there when Whitney fell down the stairs, okay? Like, I don't have like a fashion history whatsoever. Like, my entire background in fashion comes from The Hills and any other show from that time period, but I knew who this was, right? Like, this was a dream team. This was amazing. So, except for Janice Dickinson, who really was a diva and mean to the girls and was outrageous. But again, you have to think about the fact that with TV, it's first about selling something and getting people excited about something and less about the integrity of the people, I guess, right? Now, when it came to casting the actual models, Tyra said that they had to give the people what they wanted because you have to meet people where they are. And I thought this was a really interesting sentence that she said because it sounded like something white people would say. It almost sounded like something that maybe she heard from a higher level executive. And I'm not saying it's wrong whatsoever. I mean, it's wrong. The words are wrong. I mean, like the sentiment is wrong, but not the I'm sure that this happened all the time, is what I'm saying back at that time, that you have to sort of, lean into what people are looking for, which is fucked up, right? And it sort of made me think about like Bachelor Nation. And I'm sure that they had many like high level meetings like this where they were like, should we have a bachelor of color? Should we not? Should we meet people where they are? Because most of our Bachelor Nation audience is conservative. Should we not? Right. And these are probably conversations that they had. So, I can see what she's saying. It's just, it's fucked up. But again, that is one of the things that I would think were happening because of the times. Now, Ebony, she was from Cycle 1, and she had a different look, which is why Tyra wanted her there. She was dark skinned, she had a buzz cut, and the pushback apparently from the network was that they didn't want diversity. So they ended up going with Giselle Sampson, who the network agreed to, who is featured in this, but I am confused. And like, listen, you can't tell somebody's background from looking at them, but she didn't appear white to me, so I'm confused by this. I'm confused, and maybe I like was watching this part wrong, but like I wasn't sure if they were trying to say they were allowed to bring her on because she's not a person of color. I'm not sure if she is a person of color. So anyways, I was just confused about that part. But in terms of Giselle, her experience was not very good. She came onto this when she was 18 years old. She's having the other girls telling her that she has a white ass. Producers are trying to pit them against each other and saying, like, oh, one of these girls is saying XYZ about you. Now, apparently, like when these girls were making negative comments about her, like saying she has a white ass, like production chose to keep it in. And that kind of thing has stayed with her forever, like in terms of how she views her body. Now, agents apparently want nothing to do with Giselle after all of this because Tyra sort of portrayed her as a girl with no confidence, and she was just known as someone from reality TV, which wasn't respected then. So I have a few things to say about this. And, the modeling industry in general isn't a kind one, and it's not one that's ever been fair, not even today, not even with more inclusivity, right? So I will say that for the most part, like, I'm not going to say it's okay that people were saying things about your body, but at the same time, I would say that that's something that probably happened a lot in the modeling industry. In terms of sort of like pitting them against each other, again, I feel like that's something that's sort of required when it comes to reality TV. I'm not saying it's a nice thing to do. I'm just saying that's maybe something that I don't feel like that much pity for because I feel like that's something that should have been expected, especially in terms of production keeping it in. In terms of her having those comments stay with her forever, I mean, I've never been on TV or been a model, but I've had many comments stay with me forever about my body, right? Like from men, for example, right? And like in terms of her being portrayed as someone with no confidence, yeah, for sure, I could totally understand that having an impact on her future career because reality TV back then and even now is still a space where people feel like they're able to judge you by knowing such a small portion of you, as well as the concept of being on reality TV in general. So, it's only in recent years that it's become more of a respected thing and it's not looked so down upon. Like there used to be a time not very long ago where it was sort of like you're either an actor or a model or a reality star. You can't be both because one just looked sort of trashy and yeah, it just had a different level of respect. But again, that was something that she should have thought about, I guess, when she decided to do the show. Maybe it wasn't as well known then, but I think that is why a lot of people chose not to do reality TV back then when they wanted to be like serious actors or something, because they knew that the stigma that came with reality TV was going to affect them in the long run. So I will say that for the record. Now, Ebony, she wanted to come out as queer on the show and she wanted to have some sort of queer representation. So she was able to have that in terms of them showing her girlfriend on the show. But I actually heard like one of the other models in this like flashback scene basically say that she was offended by Ebony's lesbianism. So, okay. Actually kind of happy production kept that in. I want to know who that model is because that was screwed up. But in general, Ebony thought that the show would protect her and she was excited to be a role model. But when it came to the makeover part of the show, she realized the disappointment in terms of how she was being represented. So, first of all, I don't really understand why these makeovers had to happen regardless. Like, it's just something that I've been thinking about now that I've watched this documentary a couple times. I'm like, if the show was supposed to be about what it takes to become a model, but it's a competition show, right? Like, why couldn't it have just been a bunch of models are competing with each other, almost like in Miss America or any show like that? You're competing in a talent competition, you're competing in a bikini competition, you're competing in competitions, and then somebody wins. It sort of to me became more of a show about how to get you to become a top model, I guess. And I don't know. I get the wow or the very different factor that comes along with doing a makeover part of the process, but I don't know. It's sort of reminiscent of that show that Dr. Dubrow was on a long time ago that is so inappropriate now. What was it called? The Swan or something like that, where they give you these insane makeovers. Oh my God, to the point where people had like crazy body dysmorphia. Somebody should re-release that and do a I should watch that and do an episode on that because that was pretty wild. But yeah, so basically the people who were doing her hair, they didn't have the correct hair clippers. She wasn't sure if this was like a test or something. She wasn't sure what was going on. And then they end up giving her three bald spots. Like, can you imagine? As a woman, as a model, as anything, my God, can you imagine? And like, this is really upsetting for her as an African American to have her hair done incorrectly, right? Like, they should have had the people there who know how to do black hair, and that just wasn't in place for her. So Tyra barely spoke to her on the show regardless, but she thought that Tyra would take care of this and take up for her on this. But instead, Tyra approached her and said that the judges told me that you were showing up ashy every day. And she was like, why would she use that word when it's historically been offensive? And then they flash to a scene of Tyra having this conversation with Ebony saying, you're African American, you should have skin like butter. And then Tyra's also saying these other weird things that like her photo was like the hardest to retouch. So Ebony realized that she was being treated differently as a black girl, which I'm sure she has experienced many times in her life, but probably wasn't expecting to be experiencing that by another black woman, and very fair. And then they flash to a scene of the other girls in the model house asking her to wash her hands after her moisturizing routine because it was getting everything really greasy. Okay, the amount of like racism that's going on here is just like wild to me. Wild what's being said about this woman's skin. I will go on and I'm just like horrified by what I'm hearing. Then they flash to just different people calling her either aggressive, angry, difficult to work with, harsh. And those people include Tyra Banks. And this is just wild to see on TV. Like, Ebony knew that she couldn't do or say anything, like she had to be stealth. And you see that on her. You see that throughout all of this. This is not somebody that is coming off aggressive or angry or difficult to work with in any way, shape, or form. She was on this national stage thinking that the world would be proud of her. But then after she lost, she's hearing girls on the street say, "Oh, I probably can't be a model because I have rough skin like yours." So, how insane is it that Tyra is perpetuating the very stereotypes that held her up as a Black woman in the industry? And I know her argument is because she said it at the beginning that the industry still was a certain way at that time, still wanting like white and blonde and skinny and all this, but like basically to denigrate another Black woman's appearance I am flabbergasted by it, and you can just feel the projection that's happening here. And there's more of it later on. It's just kind of wild to watch. Okay, now we're going to talk about this other woman, Shandy Sullivan. She was from Cycle 2. Now, she never wanted to be a model, but her boyfriend Eric at the time thought that she should do the show. He was like, "Yeah, you could totally be a model." Now, she actually worked at Walgreens before this, and she left home at 18, didn't have a relationship with her parents, and then decided to do this. She was living in Kansas City, I think, at the time. Now, something really interesting happened on the show that I don't remember, and I'm not really sure why they had this, but they apparently brought in like this intuitive psychic. And the psychic told Shandy that nobody hugs her and she needs a family, and she ends up breaking down on camera. And when I'm watching this now, I'm like, what was the purpose of this? Are you just trying to create drama in this girl to, you know, for good TV? But it reminded me of the fact that, to my knowledge, most or all other reality shows are required to have a therapist on set. And for especially a show like this, where you have a bunch of young women who are very likely to have eating disorders, who are very likely to have low self-esteem and everything because of the industry that they're in. I'm just really surprised that there isn't somebody like that on set, given kind of the things that we talk about later, or even this, to bring in an intuitive psychic, but not a therapist. To me screams you just trying to create entertainment as opposed to making sure that these girls are really taken care of, right? And I think that that's just something that also has sort of evolved over time in terms of making sure that your cast are taken care of. But again, just with the young ages of these women and the vulnerable places that they were in, it just feels weird that there wasn't a therapist around. Not that I'm aware of, because they don't talk about it. Now we get into this really like crazy, horrifying incident where they go to Milan, like as part of the show, to show them like, okay, like this is where you would model, or, and have them do like competitions and activities out there. So they had this day where they had a bunch of like different guys driving them around on Vespas to different locations for the day. And then when they got back to the house that they were all staying in, someone suggested that those same guys come by to hang out. So they were all like, yeah, okay. So they were all hanging out and talking and drinking. Now, Shandy had not slept that day. She hadn't eaten, and she drank two whole bottles of wine by herself. But she does remember getting into the hot tub with like some of the girls and some of the guys, being extremely drunk, and then one of the guys looking at her, but then everything after that was a blur. She does talk about remembering him being on top of her. She knows that she blacked out. She knows that sex happened, but she doesn't remember feeling sex, if you know what I'm saying. She remembered being in the bed. She also remembered being in the shower at one point and also sitting in the shower. And no one did anything to stop it. And this entire thing is filmed. And we're seeing a lot of it on camera right now as part of this documentary, but apparently there's a lot more. And it's just like, why? I'm horrified that an actual assault was captured on camera by so many people, and that an actual assault happened with so many people around and no one did anything to stop it. I know these things happen all the time, but it's hard for my brain to wrap around that these things happen all the time because it's not okay. And I know that it's sort of a confusing thing, right? And we'll get into that and sort of talk about that as it goes. But yeah, I'll just sort of explain the rest. So she said that the next day she was sort of like, what the fuck happened last night? And then it sort of all hit her at once. It flooded her and she sat there and just cried. The producer asks Shandy if she thinks that production should have stopped it. And she said that she thinks that after she got out of the hot tub, like after that point in time, everything that happened after that, they should have pulled her out of this. When the producer asked Tyra about this, she sort of goes blank and says, kind of like a typical PR answer, which is just that it's difficult for her to talk about the production side of it because that's not her territory. Okay, first of all, you were just asked if you remember the story. Okay, you can answer that. Second of all, going right to it's a production thing is just so obviously like an attempt to skirt any accountability. And when the producer asked Ken, like Ken Mock, the executive producer, was there ever a sense of like, hey, we need to turn the cameras off? He said, we treated this like a documentary and we told the girls that everything would be filmed no matter what, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. Even crimes? Are you kidding? I'm I thought the point of this documentary that Tyra was trying to create is that, or the narrative that she's trying to create is that now with more information, we change our minds and we should have done things differently, right? But you don't have Ken saying that. Now, even Jay, I'm confused as to like how he felt about it. They asked Jay Manuel and he was like, well, we were off at the time. And then we got word that Shandy was having sex in the shower. And the rule was that if you go in the bathroom alone, the cameras can't follow you there. But she wasn't alone, so they documented it. I'm like, what the fuck kind of rule is that? I understand they should not follow you into the bathroom. That shouldn't change if you're alone or not. Like, I'm still like baffled at this point. Now, apparently the producers consider it like a story point, so they have to like see it all the way through. They also interview Zakiya Gibbons, who's a journalist that was included in this documentary, and she says that looking back with an adult lens, it really is disturbing. You see this scene the next day, like Tyra talking to the girls about cheating and how she always told her man, don't cheat, just flirt with girls, flirt as much as you can, and then come home to me and do me. And that's like her way of sort of like big sissing Shandy, which is just like so fucked up. So basically, after that, Shandy wants to go home. She wants to speak to Eric, but they refuse to give her a phone. Eric is her boyfriend, just to remind you. Um, but then when she told them that she wanted to leave, they were like, oh, now we can give you a phone, right? So it seems like things were able to happen when they realized that, they might lose her. But then they're like, oh, well, we're going to have to film it. And like, it just feels different than today's day and age where filming is just so much more scheduled and regimented than it used to be. And I guess I'll give grace to reality TV and its up and coming time when they were still just trying to figure out how to do it. But regardless, there are some things that you could just leave the fuck alone, right? So there's this terrible flashback to Shandy telling Eric that she had sex with someone else, and he's devastated, and she's crying in a corner. And they go back to Jay Manuel and his confessional saying that I think they took her to the doctor after that. They could have sent her to the doctor. I don't know. It's reality. We'd have to film it. Poor girl. But she was production's problem. And I'm reading it to you like that because I honestly could not tell whether he actually felt anything about this because his face didn't move. And I don't mean that in a rude way. I couldn't tell. The lack of accountability that anyone is taking in this situation is really pissing me off. They even filmed Shandy on the phone to the guy who like SA'd her, asking if he used protection and if he had any STDs. So the reason I say that there was probably worse footage is because Jay said that the Super Bowl then happened. It was the whole Janet Jackson thing with her boob and all that. And then regulations clamped down on what you could show on TV, what you couldn't. So they actually had to scale back on what they showed for Shandy's story. Now, I don't know what you mean because to me, you caught a rape happening on camera. So I don't know what else you didn't show. But apparently, years later, Tyra had Shandy on her talk show. Like, remember, Tyra had a talk show and literally showed the scene of Shandy being assaulted, and Shandy could not look at the scene. And Tyra sort of pushing her about that in, like, on camera on her talk show, being like, you can't look, you can't look. And Shandy tells the camera today that she told Tyra behind the scenes she did not want to see it and she did not want it shown, and that wasn't respected. Like, to make matters worse. Now, apparently, after the show, she and Eric tried to be together. He even moved to New York for her to try to make it as a model and all that stuff. But like it was such a fucked up time where people recognized her on the street, would call her a cheating whore, would call her a slut, like right next to her, right next to him and everything. And then her segment basically ends with like, she still works at Walgreens. And this made me so incredibly sad. Now, I just want to say, from like my perspective as somebody who worked on sexual abuse investigations, I understand why the situation can seem confusing, and I'm sure it was confusing for Shandy herself. She was inebriated at the time, which means that she couldn't consent. So we'll just say that you know, for argument's sake, okay? So she was not able to consent. But because she was inebriated, it probably took her some time to remember things. And she may have been confused for a while. She may have thought, did I consent to this? I remember pieces of it, but as her memories were coming more forward, that's when she started to realize what actually happened. But there is a lot of blame that people place on themselves when something like this happens. It's not an automatic feeling of like I was violated and somebody did something wrong to me and I'm going to go to the police. No, a lot of people place a lot of shame and blame within themselves when something like this happens. And, we only see these little tidbits of Shandy, but she seems like a very like shy kind of she doesn't have a family. She doesn't have a lot of people around her. She's in this environment where everybody just thinks that she cheated on her boyfriend. There doesn't seem to be a single person around that even asks her if she's okay or if that was something that she wanted to do. So in her mind, she probably just thinks that she was completely wrong. And even as her memories are starting to come back, she probably didn't fully ever remember everything, right? She even says that she blacked out. So because of that, she's not quite sure. And that's probably why it took her a long time to realize that this was actually rape, which it was. That doesn't change the fact that this was filmed. I mean, it's just it sort of reminds me of that season of Bachelor in Paradise that they had to kind of cut short for a little bit, where, what was her name? Corinne Olympios, and I don't remember the name of the guy, but they were sort of like canoodling in the pool. Things went too far. But she didn't blame him for it. She blamed production for not realizing that she was too drunk. They basically had to do an investigation for like 2 weeks, put everybody in hotel rooms, put them on hiatus, and then came back and gave them sort of like a after school special thing with Chris Harrison saying like this is what consent is and this is what consent isn't and this kind of thing. And it was I mean, and then we also see that scene, that flashback scene now from like the Real Housewives of OC with what do we call it? With Ryan, Tamara's son, and Gretchen, right? And we look back at that and we say like the cameras should have intervened and should have stopped this situation. Um, I don't really think it's a matter of a time period, right? I think the cameras really should have intervened. I understand that it's a documentary style show, but it's also my understanding that there's certain things that they can intervene for, like a crime or like, yeah, somebody's gonna die, right? Like if it's coming to that stage, that is when they're supposed to interfere. We've seen production interfere when it's like Jersey Shore and they're like beating each other up and everybody like you see all the production come forward to try to hold people back. We've seen that in other Bravo shows as well on occasion, right? So to allow an assault like this to happen when it's clear that this girl can't really function and she can't really make a decision for herself, I think there should be more accountability here. I understand that Tyra, Jay, whoever, we're not like the production company, but like this is your show. This is your baby, as you keep saying. Take some accountability for what happened here. So I'll just say that for the record. So next top model becomes worldwide. Like I said, I'm even watching the Canada one. Smize, that word has become like a worldwide word, right? Everybody knows what it means. Smile with your eyes. So there was this high pressure from the network to maintain the show and to grow the audience. It was a time of when crazy things were happening, like Fear Factor and like crazy kinds of shows. So they were just having the girls do insane types of competitions, like suspending from ledges. They had them wear dead animal carcasses. Tyra told the camera that she sort of felt like she had a knack for knowing what people wanted to see. But then I feel like production did her a little shady in this Netflix documentary when they show her having the girls pose with pigeons on their heads. And yeah, you do ask, for why, right? Like, why would you do that? Or having the girls pose as homeless people with real homeless people in the background. Can you imagine? So there's people who actually need homes, people who actually need money, and you're getting up in their very tight space, not giving them any money, and then just taking up their space. Like, What? This should have gotten more traction. Like, this was kind of wild to me to hear this. Okay, let's move on to another player that we have in this documentary named Danny Evans. She was from Cycle 6. Her brother told her that this show could be her ticket out of her hometown, so she decided to do it. We're also going to talk about Joni Sprague. She was also from Cycle 6. She quit American Eagle to do the show. So, as a special treat, Tyra sent both of these girls, well, pretty much all the girls, but especially Danny and Joni, to the dentist. Now, for Joni to have her snaggle tooth removed and for Danny to close her gap in between her two front teeth. So they go to the dentist, and Danny loves the gap. She wants to keep it, she doesn't want to do it. Joni was just kind of feeling like, I don't know, I'm young. There's no one for me to call. They even made her like sign all of these forms when she got there and didn't really give her a chance to like have a conversation with like her mom or anything about it. She ends up having this crazy surgery where they remove four teeth. The surgery goes on all night. And when the producers ask Tyra about this, all she says is insane. And that's like, like there really isn't more to it than that. Like the concept. Okay, we'll move on to Danny. But Tyra basically tells Danny that, during cycle 6, that the gap isn't marketable and that she can only stay if she closes the gap. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there many famous models with teeth gaps? Like, I feel like, and I can't even think of one off the top of my head, but even back then, I feel like one of the most famous models at the time had a teeth gap. I don't know, and it did make her look very individual, and it didn't look bad on her. But to Danny, she was like, Tyra is basically asking me to change my body, which is wild, right? It really is. Then get this, and I didn't remember this whatsoever. A few seasons later, Tyra made a girl widen the gap between her teeth that was already there. Okay. So first she says, this isn't marketable. Then a few years later, she's like, make it bigger. Like, can you imagine? So when producers asked Tyra about this, she said, I already apologized to Danny when that happened. But she says that she was between a rock and a hard place because she had agents that told her that they wouldn't work with the gap. I don't know. But then she keeps repeating, like, that's just what they told me. That's just what agents were telling me. So again, Tyra wants to tell her narrative, which is that I'm blaming everybody else. I'm not taking any accountability. So I kind of want to talk about the model's health for a second, because this is something that definitely was a black mark on this show, but I would say is something that wasn't as thoroughly explored as I would like, which I mentioned in the beginning. So keep in mind, these models are young, right? They don't, they're typically malnourished, they're not eating well, and it was confusing for them to even verbalize that they were scared when certain things were happening. They weren't applauded for putting their health on the back burner. It was just sort of expected. And when a girl got sick, they would just sort of milk it for TV drama. And they showed a lot of scenes of girls like passing out and stuff. And I don't even remember it being that crazy, right? But again, that is TV drama. So these girls are typically, yeah, like I said, malnourished, overworked, not hydrated enough. Now, the scene in particular that really stuck out for me and that I've remembered since the beginning of time is the hypothermia scene. I don't remember the girl, but basically they want her to get in the pool for some photo shoot. And she is freezing to death. She's getting hypothermia, okay? And at the end of the day, they end up having to call like an ambulance and everything. And I remember Tyra saying to her basically like, you need to basically toughen up and you need to as a model, be able to work through the elements and be able to work through all of these different types of circumstances. But at the same time, you also have to know thyself well enough to know when it's too much and to be able to come to us and say, hey, I need help. Hey, I need to go to the hospital. And I thought to myself, you're putting her in a lose-lose situation. You're telling her to buck up and deal with it, but then you're also telling her to complain when she needs. It's like how she can't do both, right? And I remember thinking like, how could she have won in this situation? Like, what could she have done if she quit and said, hey, I'm dying? They would have chastised her for that. Or if she continued on, she would have died in the pool of hypothermia, right? Like there was no winning with Tyra at some point. Then there was also the crime scene victim photo shoot. So Dion Walter, she was from Cycle 8. Her mother was actually shot. And the show knew this about her because it was part of like her entrance story. And they had the models do a photo shoot involving gun violence. And she thinks that maybe they wanted to see her like lose her shit, but she didn't. Now, very interestingly enough, Ken Mock takes full accountability for this one. He's like, we were basically like celebrating gun violence. And yeah, we shouldn't have done that one. That was bad. But that's pretty much the only thing Ken Mock is taking accountability for. Now let's get into the race swapping photo shoot, okay? I do remember this, and this is wild. And it's so interesting to get a little more information on the backstory here. So this is for like a Got Milk ad. Jay Manuel talks about how his parents are from South Africa. He's aware of apartheid. So he just felt like race swapping was like, wow, it was like so something that made him uncomfortable. So first, he actually asked to be excused from the photo shoot, but he felt like his role was starting to have limitations because the shoot was happening regardless, right? Like whether he's there or not, this is happening. And he's like, I don't know if I want to be a part of it, like this entire thing anymore. Now, this I did not recall at all, but they had each woman cradle a 3-year-old of the race that they're mimicking. And this is just the most cringy thing I have ever seen. I was literally sitting on my couch, cringing to death. Now, Tyra said she didn't think that this was controversial at the time, but the world lost its mind. And I think she means at the time, right? Not even just now. I feel like this was one of the things that was never okay. But then, and this is also something I don't remember, they did it again 9 cycles later. They're making white girls Native American with like a Native American headdress. They're painting their skin brown. It's like, ugh. Oh, and Tyra says, looking at it through the 2020 lens, yes, she can see that this is offensive, but girl, this was always offensive, right? Like, you know, again, as a black woman, it's confusing that she doesn't understand why blackface would always be offensive, right? It's the same reasons now, and it's in 2020 that white people may have opened their eyes to understand it more, but I'm not understanding why she didn't always understand that it wasn't okay. Now we're going to talk about somebody else in the documentary from Cycle 4 named Kenya Hill. Now, in her life, she was always told that she was thin, she was too skinny. But in this environment, she was basically told that weight is her biggest problem. They tried to create this narrative around her weight, like making her the element, or sorry, the elephant in an animal photo shoot and showing her eating the same bagel over and over again, but making it look like it was different bagels, like just making it always look like she's eating. Tyra also said to her at one point, you could have a burger, but take the bread off. And then Janice flat out said, you need to lose weight. So again, it's the modeling industry. So it's kind of hard to be like, oh my God, I'm aghast. I can't believe they said that 25 years ago or today, right? Like it's sort of it's sort of one of those gross elements that kind of came with the modeling industry. Do you know what I mean? And again, I'm not okay with it, but it's because this is about the modeling industry, it sort of makes sense that there was some weight stuff. Now, Tyra defends it by saying that those were the beauty standards at the time. Yet those were the same kinds of comments that Tyra was also getting in the tabloids, if you think about it, right? Like people were really hard on Tyra once she left modeling about her body, right? Like she was all over the cover of tabloids showing like cellulite, showing her like in bathing suits and stuff. And that's why it's so interesting that again, she's perpetuating those same beauty standards onto these girls. And I wonder if, I still to this day believe that she did this show with good intent, but I think it sort of became about her projecting things that she never dealt with herself. Oh, look at me with my fake therapy degree. Just kidding. So Kenya tells a story about how they were filming on a set where one of the models, this guy Martini, he kept flirting with her and he was making her really uncomfortable. And when they were shooting, he started like actually touching her and rubbing up on her and making her uncomfortable. So she's trying to stop the shoot and she's like, oh, I'm just getting really uncomfortable. I'm hearing moaning. I can't. And Jake basically says, like, be professional, buck up and get it together. She gets really emotional about it even now in this documentary that this even happened to her and that it was all filmed. And they show this whole thing to us, right? Like Kenya actually had the balls to tell the panel what happened on the show, which I appreciate. Like that, like I'm saying, all of this is filmed. This guy rubbing up against her is filmed. Her saying that she doesn't want to do this anymore is filmed and that she's uncomfortable. Her crying afterwards. Her saying to the panel of judges, hey, this guy was making me uncomfortable. And then And then the what do you call it? Then the judges basically like judge her or have the audacity to judge her lack of movement in the photo that she takes for like, the photo shoot where she's being harassed in the photo. So at least when they flash back to this, Nigel at least cringes when production shows him in these scenes saying basically like you need to get control of the situation. But he also says that part of that is true of kind of the world and also of the time where that kind of harassment happened a lot, which again is not okay, but also something that I'm sort of aware of when it comes to the fashion industry. I don't know why that was ever okay either, to be quite honest with you. You have all of these people around you at this photo shoot, seeing you uncomfortable. They're not picking up on her cues, I guess. I'm not defending it whatsoever. I'm just like, I can't believe that these kinds of things, and I'm trying to justify it in my mind in some way, that these kinds of things are happening out in the open and no one's doing anything about it, right? And I'm just so impressed with this girl for saying to this panel of judges, like, hey, here's what happened to me. But then you have Tyra saying to her, well, based on, I basically told her, like, you need to basically tell him, like, hey, back up, back up. And then you keep on working, you keep on going through it. Now, Tyra says now that that was because that was based on the information that she had and what she knew. But today, which as we know is her 2020 lens, she would have said stop immediately and, apologizes now to Kenya. But she says that she did the best that she could have done for the time. And like, again, I disagree. I feel like this is one of those things where it was always inappropriate. This girl told you that this guy was making her uncomfortable and touching her inappropriately. I don't think this is necessarily something new for the times. That being said, I would say that this is probably something that Tyra experienced a lot as a model, and maybe again has that lens within herself of this is what I experienced and this is sort of normal. It comes with the industry, and no one had maybe told her that she could have and should have stopped it, right? Because not everybody had ever felt like they could, right? And maybe she just felt like, this is something you sort of expect in the industry and now realizes, hey, we never should have been okay with that kind of thing. Regardless, this was absolutely devastating to watch, quite frankly, to see all of this footage exist. And again, we don't really have anyone taking full accountability here, and that's just disgusting. We also talked to Whitney Thompson, who was the Cycle 10 plus size model winner, right? She actually said the show was hard on her because it felt demeaning because she wasn't a sample size, which is basically all they had on set. And I don't remember this. I think I remember this season a little bit. This wasn't a season of plus size models. I think she was just a plus size model on the show, which yeah, made no sense. If you're gonna have a plus size model on the show, then make sure that you have the types of clothing for them. Like it really doesn't make sense that they decided to have her on, but then didn't think of all of those things. So that's sort of crazy. And then she ends up saying later on that even though she won, she was given this modeling contract, goes to the modeling agency, and they don't even have a plus size modeling division. So it's basically worthless. How is that even possible? Like, why would they sign you to a contract when they can't even give you any work, right? Like, so it's crazy to think of how little this show did for people, but we'll get there in a minute. We're going to talk about one more person, Tiffany. I did not catch what cycle that she was from or her last name, so my apologies. If you want to leave it in the comments, feel free to do so. So basically what happened with Tiffany was she was someone who was on cycle 4 initially. She ended up having to leave the show for getting into like a bar fight or something, but Tyra's team really mentored her. They saw a lot of potential in her, and I'm not sure in what way they got her basically like got helped her get her life back together in some way, but then bring her back for a later season. And she was sort of Tyra's girl. Like Tyra loved her. Tyra, I guess, saw a lot of herself in Tiffany. And it sort of all came to blows where the girls were tasked with this competition where they had to read off a teleprompter. And it was the names of a lot of designers, which were hard to say. A lot of them were French names. And Tiffany just basically gave up. She's like, I don't want to do this. I'm over it. And Tyra just sort of loses it at that moment. She's just like, I'm going to let two of you go, which apparently never happened. So it was Tiffany and this other girl. And this is where she gives her infamous speech to Tiffany, which has been memed a million times, where she's like, we were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. Now, apparently, It went well beyond that. She really tore this girl a new one to the point where production stopped right after that. Lawyers were called in right after that, and a lot of crazy stuff went down. Now, Tyra tells the camera that after working with her to like get her here and to see her giving up, she she just kind of lost it. She does admit that she knows that she went too far, so you do get some accountability here from Tyra in that regard. But it seems like she had, or I don't know, it seems like she's put some thought into this because she says that it was sort of bigger than that. It was more about like all Black girls and all of the challenges that they had, and all of those things were kind of coming to her in the moment. And that maybe that was just some like Black girl stuff that went deep inside of her that she projected onto Tiffany. So I don't know if that's something that she talked about in therapy or that's something that somebody told her, but she's got to unpack that more, right? Because I think what she's saying there is really reflected in the way she treated a lot of these women, if you think about it. But it's crazy to watch, crazy to know that there was so much more that we actually didn't see, quite frankly, but crazy to watch her go off on this girl. And it sort of reminds me of like this scene. I'm watching old shows from the beginning where Reza goes off on this guy who's Iranian and gay, basically just because he had an easier life than Reza. And he projected all of that anger about having to live a more difficult life as an Iranian gay man onto this guy, right? And it's watching projection is quite wild. It really is, I have to say. Um, so apparently, like, you know, things just got crazy after that. And it was at that point, or by the time like they were approaching cycle 8, Jay was sort of struggling to keep things different and new. He also had to say like crazy things to be able to get people to stay on the show because, he'd be told because there's always a production element, right? So there was always an element of um we need to keep storylines going, right? So he had to be told sometimes, oh, we want to keep this person a couple episodes longer, try to come up with a reason for them to stay, which is difficult when you don't really feel like they deserve to be there, right? But the storyline is always more important than the actual people on the show. So he just was feeling in a way where like I feel like I'm ready to leave. I feel like I want to go off and do my own thing. So he was really scared to do this. He knew he needs to tell Tyra. They've had this long-standing relationship. So he sends her this email, first starting off with his gratitude and how this show has changed his life and yada, yada, yada. But basically, that he wants to move on with his life and his career and do his own thing. She doesn't respond for 3 days, but then writes only this: I am disappointed. And basically, after that, for the end of time, all communication basically just stopped. So, but not long after that, he gets word from his lawyers that he was being asked, I guess, by her to sign on for one more cycle. And then the words blacklisted weren't used, but it was definitely implied. So he was like, okay, like, we don't have a relationship now. I don't know how we're supposed to continue. So somehow they continued to film together, but never really talked outside of filming, but then learned to fake it for the cameras, which is just so uncomfortable and weird. Now, when producers asked Tyra what happened between her and Jay, she says that she doesn't want to do this here, but he's a special man. So I thought that that was a really interesting. She refused to speak about him. And from what we know, I mean, we only know his side of the story, right? He didn't, all he really wanted to do was leave. But I'm just making an assumption here. Maybe she found it disrespectful that he came to her with it in an email. Given their very long-standing relationship, maybe she felt offended that he didn't come to her in person and took that as almost like a betrayal. And you can tell that women like this, they when they do this, I've had a boss like this, or I've had a few bosses like this. When they cut you out like this and cold turkey you, or like gray rock you almost in a sense, right? It's like they feel this sense of betrayal because it's how Lisa Vanderpump does it almost in a way, except that when Lisa Vanderpump does it, she's very vocal about it. She's like, I did all of these things for you, and this is the thanks I get. It's something that my mom always used to say. But instead, Tyra is just giving him like the cold shoulder, the silent treatment as like the punishment, right? And I think it's fascinating that she's not speaking about it here. This is her opportunity. I could see why he sent that email though, because he was clearly afraid and he was right to be. But I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think. I mean, I wouldn't cut off a friendship for that reason, but she's also like, not maybe like the most reasonable person either, right? So who really knows? So I don't know. Now let's move on to eliminations, I guess, because this concept is very interesting in terms of like what happens after the fact. So apparently Tyra and producers never call you after. They're never like, hey, thanks for being on the show. Are you okay? Nothing like that. Sometimes the contestants had to stay wherever they were, like wherever you're being eliminated. So let's say it's in Milan, right? You have to be there for confidentiality reasons, which would be the same as like The Bachelor or any other show like that. Because if you come back early and you're seen, then people know that you lost the show. You also couldn't tell anyone that you were let go, so you couldn't really get like that support that you need. I think that is a little bit different now. I think like your producer or like a therapist stays with you, but again, maybe different things for different shows. And I really believe that a show like this should very much have a therapist. Um, None of the ladies could use any of the photos from America's Next Top Model in their modeling portfolios, which I thought was interesting because they were so like performative and pronounced and like, didn't really showcase your versatility, I guess, as a model. The competition didn't really help jumpstart anyone's modeling careers because there was still that stigma attached to reality TV. But again, that is something that we just sort of knew at the time that has come to change. Now, Tyra, she thinks that regardless of all of this, she really thinks that this show opened the doors for so many different kinds of models. People like Eva Marcel, who was really short, she was 5'5", Winnie Harlow, Isis, who was one of the first trans models, and then Whitney, who we talked about earlier, who was the first plus size model to win. But for the most part, it doesn't really seem like people were able to book things because they were deemed reality stars. That was something that happened to Danny. She wasn't getting booked for any shows. And a lot of these girls were sort of back to square one after it or worse. Again, I don't know. When you go on a show like this, I don't know if, I mean, I like that it had the concept of trying to propel you into the space. And I do find it odd that given that it would get you a contract with a modeling agency, plus it gets your name out there, I am surprised to hear that it didn't help people, especially the ones who got the modeling contracts. And obviously that was really fucked up for Whitney to get a modeling contract with a company that doesn't even sell clothes that you can wear. So that doesn't even make any sense. Or doesn't work with brands that sell clothes that you can wear. So I don't know. That part I would say I was surprised at. And I don't know if that's even necessarily the show's fault or production's fault or even Tyra's fault because I guess the concept of the show was supposed to try to help you, and I don't think it did anything to deter, I guess, except for the fact that it was a reality show. But again, that's on you to make the determination of whether you're willing to take the risk of going on reality TV when at the time it's still at that stigma. So then there ended up being a shift because, of course, there's going to be this show is on for a million years. They got to do things differently. So one day, the network demands to speak to Tyra. And according to her, she was told, we got to make some cuts. We got to do some big changes. And you've got to let go of the big three, Jay, Jay, and Nigel. And that just sounds crazy to me. There was nothing wrong with them. There was no reason for those three to go. People really liked them. They liked their banter. They liked their vibe. They brought it to the show. But Tyra just cared about the show more than anything. And for Miss J, she sent him flowers for his birthday, and then he gets fired 5 days later. Now, there was this leak put out that they were fired because initially there was like a conversation being like, hey, let's just treat it like this amicable thing, and we will put out like a joint statement, like when couples break up, right? But Jay is convinced that Tyra put it out there and she was the one who was the leak because this creates drama for the show. The show is, not as interesting anymore. It's been on for like 22 cycles or whatever it is at this point. So he feels like she created this to bring back up drama. Nigel personally was really upset because he didn't have a backup plan and he felt betrayed. Tyra tells the camera that this just came from above, but she thinks that to this day, like the Jays and Nigel think that she was the one who did this to them and that this was her idea, but this came from above. So again, no accountability. I don't know, right? Like you would think that you would see more remorse on her face if she didn't have any involvement in this. I could also see them saying to her, like, it's either you or them, and then she threw them under the bus. I don't think it's crazy that she chose the show over them. I mean, but when you've built these long-standing friendships and relationships, yeah, maybe she could have fought for them. She could have been like, if they go, I go, right? And like, you couldn't lose them all. She could have tried to fight for them, and it doesn't really seem like she did. Um, They tried to reinvent the show by doing lots of different types of cycles, like a petite model season, which I really liked, to be honest. And I don't remember that being like a gimmicky season, like because I'm a short girl, right? So I liked that season. I thought that was cool. But then they just started doing like other weird gimmicky things. Ratings started going down dramatically. And after cycle 22, the network went to Ken and said, basically, they don't want Tyra to host the show anymore, which is crazy, right? It just shows that everyone is replaceable. Even though it's your show, even you are replaceable. I don't even remember this happening, to be quite honest, right? I think I was so far off watching it at this point. And I always say this, but there's nothing wrong with ending shows in their prime. There's no reason to keep it going on for this long. So they do replace her with another host. It stays on the air for 24 cycles. And then there was just basically a mutual decision not to do it anymore. So, I mean, the big players of this show went on to do amazing things. Nigel got to work with Taylor Swift. Jay wrote a novel and had a contract with E. Miss J did top model in other countries. But then Miss J had a stroke in 2022. Now, of course, Jay and Nigel went to visit him, but to this day, Tyra still hasn't. Now, the documentary actually brings Jay, and Nigel all together in this scene so they can see each other, but not with Tyra. So it's kind of cute to see them get like emotional seeing each other. Miss J gets emotional, like just with everything that he's going through. And it's so sad. He talks about missing being the queen of the runway. He talks about how he taught models how to walk and now he can't walk. And that's just so ironic, but it's like, it's devastating, right? It's when you can no longer do the thing that's part of what made you you, that could just so like really fuck with your mind, right? It's a mind fuck. But then he says not yet. And then I loved his optimism about that. He's like, I can't walk yet. And he confirmed that Tyra has yet to visit him in any capacity. Tyra now lives in Australia, did a bunch of businesses. And that's something like you have no idea what we have planned for cycle 25. So I don't know if this is their way of dropping like, oh, we're getting another season, but like I'm good off that. Now, Tyra ends this by saying, like, this was great, basically, because the only way to learn is to be called out on your shit. So she was glad to be called out on it so that she could answer it. But I think the part that she's missing again is the accountability piece. That was very much lacking here. And because she didn't take accountability, the being called out on it just didn't really, the math just didn't math, Tyra. The math did not math. Overall, I enjoyed the documentary, but like I said, wish it could have been more detailed, wish it could have been longer. But still, I'm curious to see what happens next from, the aftermath of this for sure. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the episode. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Bravo Investigator. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, join my Facebook group, and join the Patreon if you can at patreon.com/The Bravo Investigator Podcast. And I love you, BBs. I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bravo Investigator Podcast. For more content, head over to patreon.com/The Bravo Investigator Podcast. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Bravo Investigator. If you enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. Love you, BBs. See you next time.